Welcome to the 40th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast. I am your host, Mark Hasera, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. I lived a childhood dream. I dreamt of flying 707s, and for 24 years, I flew KC-135s all over the world, passing gas. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. Our purpose here is to share their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and private aviation operations? These stories and lessons learned increase our critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground, and allow some of these great combat veterans to share their stories. You are hearing them for the very first time. The Lessons from the Cockpit show is supported by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. Folks, please go to wallpilot.com and take a look at some of these aviation graphics printed on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. There are 125 ready to print 4-foot, 6-foot, and 8-foot images of airplanes from the Second World War all the way up to 6th gen fighters. So please go buy Wall Pilot and support us so that we can keep this show going by ordering some of these prints for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. On today's show, we are talking with Command Chief Master Sergeant Dave Nordel, life and leadership from the farm to the combat zone and beyond. And he's going to share with us some of his leadership stories of being the senior non-commissioned officer on some of these bases, both deployed and here at home. He was the Command Chief Master Sergeant for the 92nd Air Refueling Wing at Fairchild Air Force Base, one of the bases that I was at. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show with Chief Dave Nordel. Command Chief Master Sergeant Dave Nordel is in the house. How you doing, Chief?
I'm doing great, sir. Looking forward to this. I don't feel worthy. I'm listening to your other stuff, and you got some pretty heavy hitters on here.
Well, you know, you and I are fortunate to have a very expansive Rolodex because of all the places we've been and all the people that we have met. I am extremely fortunate to have people like you come on who have been in incredible leadership positions, not only here in the States, but also deployed. And I'm sure we're going to get into that.
Yeah,
I'm sure we're going to get into that.
We'll have some good chats. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Chief, tell everybody just a quick background, who you are and what you've done.
So, you know, Mark, it all starts where you grew up, right? The roots are all founded in Northern California. I was actually born at Beale Air Force Base. My dad left when I was young, but I was born at Beale, and my family they all immigrated from Portugal, and they're all dairy. Grew up in a dairy farming community, small community, very small, and a lot of hard work. To be honest with you, I wanted to go in the Navy. I talked to the Navy recruiter 3 years before I graduated high school. And on the day all the recruiters came to the high school to do our ASVAB tests, the Navy recruiter was not such a nice guy. And this Air Force recruiter, Master Sergeant John D, walks up to me and says, how would you like to join the Air Force? And off we went. Worked in the orchards and the farms for a year out of high school, and then delayed enlisted in the Air Force. And I wanted to be a plumber. They asked me what I want to be, and I said I want to be a plumber. And the Air Force sometimes is smarter than the individual. Air Force looked at my stuff and said, no, I think you need to get into medicine. You need to be a medic. And boy, that put me on a heck of a path for the next 30 years because it was the right choice. My first job in the Air Force was delivering babies on an OBGYN floor. Worst assignment ever, Mark. I was 19, I was single, and I was at Torrejon Air Base 20 minutes outside of downtown Madrid. It was just awful. No, it actually...
No, doesn't it suck when you get an assignment like that?
Yes, I know. The Air Force just did me wrong. And we could talk a little
particularly
bit
during Ferrio season.
Right. Oh, yeah. It's just terrible stuff. And you tanker guys, I think the only time 135s ever broke was up in Zab. So it was all good.
And we did that on purpose.
Yes, absolutely. Because there was some sort of festival going on.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful thing.
And I learned we can't get parts for 3 days.
Right. That's right. Right. And, and you had the wrong plane to make that excuse because that thing never broke. You know, from there, my second assignment, which I talked to everybody under the sun that I could get to know, and my second assignment, I wanted to stay overseas so bad. And I ended up at Grissom Air Force Base in Indiana. And that was all 135s. And we're going to talk about that today because there's some reverse leadership lessons, things that I learned as a really young guy and some stuff that was done for me that was really formative. I think that there's some huge stepping stones as we go through this. I've raised two boys. They're both in having a fabulous life. And my wife and I have been married 30 years, and she's a veteran of 7 years herself. So
what did she do?
She was a nurse in the Air Force, and then she got out and raised kids.
So that's how you guys met?
Yeah, we met at Upper Hayford in the early 90s.
Another hurt me assignment.
Oh, I was terrible. You can throw a Fairford in there too. I've been blessed. There's a sprinkling of things like Mogadishu, Somalia in 93 and my time in Iraq, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I've been blessed, and I will tell you, my philosophy on a lot of things, Mark, in the United States Air Force, and I think even in the corporate world is, if you really aspire to do something, 80% of that is being pushed up and 20% is being pulled up. And I had some great leaders above me that kind of paved the way. But the people around me and the people that I was leading were the ones that believed in me enough to push me to where I got. And I'm so appreciative of that. In the book, I try to really emphasize that and how you take care of people. And I told General Artlight one time, I said, sir, I find that the AMC general officers have a little bit of a different flavor and maybe be a little more prepared when they get a large chunk of enlisted people underneath them because they came out of crewed aircraft. And when you're on the headset with an airman first class boom operator from the world over the pond to wherever you're going, and you're telling each other your life stories, you get to find out about their finances and the fact that they're on WIC and they've got 2 kids and they can't make ends meet or whatever that is. But you find out what drives them and you find the differences, and the good leaders out of that remember those things. And when they really are in control of stuff, they're aware of that. And so those are the people that I've really appreciated along the way.
Oh, man, I have flown with so many baby booms, particularly as a lieutenant colonel. Let's give him to the old gray-haired guy. But You know what, Dave? It was fun because it was a blessing and a joy to see their faces light up when you deployed to someplace like Fairford or Mildenhall or Kadena or Thailand or Guam, okay? They're like going, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this existed,
right?
And to sit there and really help train and mold a brand new enlisted boom operator, okay? An airman 2 or 3 striper was just fantastic time.
That is actually a perfect segue. So I get to Grissom Air Force Base after this terrible assignment in Spain. It's in May, so you can imagine how tall the corn is, because if you've been to Grissom, the corn grows right on the base. Yep. So you can imagine how tall the corn is, and you can imagine the humidity in the day. You can just feel that. And one thing, I hunt and fish. I'm an outdoors. And one thing I knew if I was going to go back to the States was I was going to hunt, because I didn't do a lot of hunting in Spain. I was going to hunt. I wasn't on the base, but a couple of months, and we just had started the R model retrofit coming out of the A-frames. So I had to learn this, right? Because I was always inquisitive. I had to learn this, and I wanted to know what that was all about. It was pretty publicized, right? That was a big deal. A lot of government money got spent, went through Congress. So this little article comes out in the base paper. It says, if you're a hunter, call this number to hunt off the end of the flight line, because they had lost an engine like a week into the R model retrofit to a Dove. So I'm thinking this is golden money. All I got to do is call this number. So I call this number, and the tech sergeant answers over at ops. And he says, you need to come in and talk to the wing DO, who was then Colonel Andreyko, was his name. You need to talk to the wing DO about it.
I know Andreyko.
And so he's an imposing guy. When you're a young airman, that guy is the world. And so I got to go down there, and because I'm a hunter, I'm going to hunt. So I go down there, and they said, yeah, Colonel's in his office. I'll let him know. Airman Nordel's here. So here's the wing DO, and he pulls me in, and he asked me questions like a hunter would ask. When do you hunt? When did you start hunting? Tell me about your experiences. And we went through all that, and he says, hey, I might come out and hunt with you. He says, but I'm not kidding. Think about the day. He said, just at the front gate, let them know what you're doing. You got your gun in the car. The front gate, let them know what you're doing. And when you get to the tower, buzz them on the tower and ring them and tell them where you're going to hunt so that they can watch you. So off I went. I hunted on the end of the flight line. Well, it wasn't about, a week or two later, he calls me up and he says, what are you doing? And I said, what do you mean? I said, you want to go hunt? And then he goes, no. He says, what are you doing? Well, nothing. Well, what's your... And he must have taken a liking to me, but he changed this is a leader. He went from Dave Nordel, airman, I don't know what I'm going to do at my 4-year point. I'm involved, but I'm not fully committed. I'm not dyed in blue. He took me from that point to basically probably planting the seeds to a guy that was going to end up being the 20th Air Force Command Chief. And he did that. This is a medic. You guys don't even like medics. All we do is denif you, right?
Or shoot us in the arm with needles.
Right, exactly. Right. So there's a lot of love lost. And so the guy tells me, he says, there's a sortie going out at this time, and I want you to come in here and talk to the same tech sergeant the day before, and he's going to tell you where to be. And Mark, they put me on an airplane, and the next thing I know, I'm laying in a boom pod refueling F-111s out of Cannon. I don't know where we met them, over in Kansas, middle of nowhere somewhere. We're refueling F-111. I'm laying there and I can see the pilot, I can see the pilot. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, this is unreal. Now you take that from a guy that's working in the emergency room down at the small hospital that later became a clinic. You take that and you dump me. The major that was flying, and he had a brand new right seater with him. And I'm sitting in the jump seat, and you know that jump seat, it's not very well taken care of. We'll talk about that.
Nor is it very comfortable.
No, and it sucked. But to me, It was the best place in the house. So we're turning on final, and co-pilot says, sir, he needs to get in the back and buckle in. And the major says, no, he doesn't. He needs to stay right there. You want to talk about buy-in and having it. So Colonel and Draco, through this odd relationship, must have seen something in me that was potential. He used to call me at work and everybody, the wing DO's on the phone for you. What is going on? And he would call me.
What'd you do?
Well, you're right. Yeah. And everybody thought I was in trouble. What happened? Grissom was my longest assignment in 30 years, 3 years, 3 months. And Desert Storm's what pushed me out of there. I had orders to the Philippines. The volcano went off. I didn't ship my household goods, but I was too close. So they offered me an assignment. They were going to send me to Bentwaters, England. And then USAFE diverted me to Balıkesir, Turkey to do the nuclear mission during Desert Storm. And my orders weren't out, but about 15 minutes, and the phone rings and it's Colonel Draco. And he said, I'm canceling your orders. We need you here. And she scared me to death because I thought he had the power to do that. And I said, what? And he goes, no. He goes, I'm really proud of you. Thank you for everything you've done. And he says, I'm going to keep my eye on you. I'd gone to independent duty school to be an advanced medic. To ride the MX missile rail train, believe that or not, that was all Reagan's stuff. Yeah, and they were building.
I remember it well.
But they sent me to Balıkesir to do TAC nukes, to do Cold War TAC nukes on a mountaintop. And I did the ORI. They took me out to the ORI of Beale, and I flew the ORI with them. And they put me on an airplane out there too. I feel blessed. My house is full of the airplanes that I have in my house, Mark. The majority of them are 135s, and I never got away from that airplane. I was always going. My first command chief job was Fairchild, and we'll talk about that. So a blessing in my career. I don't even know where he's at. I don't even know if he's alive. Mark and Draco did one thing, and I don't think he even understands the impact, because he put me in a situation to impact a lot of people for a long time. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, he was another great American too. I have no idea where he is. Hey, talk to us about being in Turkey at a tactical nuke assignment. What that must have been like.
Well, so it was my first,
particularly during Desert Storm with all the commotion that's going on over there.
And so that mission, Turkish base, 125 Americans, the majority of them are cops. We're guarding the gravity bombs. They're flying top of the line F-104s.
Oh, jeez.
I actually had a relationship with the Turkish pilots because they wanted our American flight surgeon viewpoint on some physiology stuff. They would take you out to show you the airplane. Now, if you were showing somebody a 135, you would probably talk about, if you're standing outside of it, you'd talk about the power generation systems. And then when you got inside, there's the front and the back, right? You're gonna show them the cockpit, you're gonna show them the boom, you're gonna show them all the working stuff, and that's what people do. When a Turkish pilot would take you out to an F-104, they would go, look, we finally got Martin Baker ejection seat. That was the first thing that they would show you. So I kind of knew that there was a reason why they called that plane the Widowmaker. So Desert Storms, by the time I get there, we have not gone into Iraq yet, but everything's heating up. And so we've got two postures. We've got this Cold War posture that was anti-Soviet posture. And then we've got this other posture of, if you remember, they talked about if you use chemical weapons, there would be proportional response, and how do you do that, and those type of things. There was some anxiety over whether or not we'd have to execute that mission. I don't think any of us wanted to do it because we knew what that meant, but we were ready to do that. We got locked down for a while. NATO missions are odd. And in the middle of it, they threw a salty nation and an ORI on us and all kinds of crazy stuff. I know that you've thumbed through my book, and the most significant thing that came out of Turkey was, making the tough call. And, we can talk about that now. Or when you're an independent duty medic in the Air Force, Mark, a lot of people don't understand it because you don't end up in these isolated places, but they send you back to school and they teach you diagnostics. You're the physician. They teach you dentistry. They teach you water testing. They teach you food testing. They teach you lab and X-ray if you have those capabilities. And you got to do it all by yourself. I sewed comm troops the end of her finger back on a pool table in the middle of Desert Storm because I couldn't get her out. All I had was a telephone, and we had closed down our aid station because it was outside of a perimeter that we had set up. So we had moved all of our basic, our rudimentary medical stuff up to the rec room in the bar, the little Teardrop Tavern. And my partner held a flashlight and we put the end of her fingertip back on, and it actually made it. It was a heroic thing. So that PRP mission, as you know, because you were in Peas, that's a stressful mission, and that's a lot of responsibility. And the medical side of it is so administratively intense. It's tough.
PRP, folks, for those that don't know, is SAC's way of putting you under their microscope to make sure you don't do anything wrong. And I can't remember what it stands for, Dave, right off the top of my head.
Personal Reliability Program.
Thank you.
And that's a self-reporting thing, right?
Yeah.
Integrity first.
And fortunately, the tanker guys didn't have to deal with it, but all the FB-111 guys did because they're handling nuclear surety stuff, you know? And man, if you went afoul of PRP, things could get dangerous for you.
Well, and the inspections were, in the General LeMay days, if you got it wrong, he just flew in a new colonel and you swapped on the flight line, and that was the end of the wing commander.
Oh, yeah.
It's that drastic. Yeah,
and I remember at Peas, man, all of the FB-111 guys and all the loaders and everything like that having to go through PRP interviews and documentation, all the stuff that, to make sure you're not going to go crazy with a nuke somewhere.
And for your senior officers that have dealt with that, the guys and gals that are listening, your senior officers that dealt with that, you want to talk about an added responsibility. Be it squadron commander in a PRP unit and have to look at one folder that's got a whole guy's life. And when you sign that folder, you're saying you're okay to be around nuclear weapons at whatever level.
We had an FB-111 navigator that got canned, and the whole trial of him and everything like that, drug use and not just marijuana, but other things.
Right.
We later found out there was a lot of other things involved.
Right.
As they started peeling back the onion, Dave. Yeah. And it was amazing to see how quickly that process worked when something that grievous had been done,
Right. And it's still there. And, my life ended in that, and as the 20th Air Force Command Chief, we had
because you're in missiles.
Right. Yeah. And so of interest to the audience for sure, because I don't think that there's a lot of us that went through all of this, and some of the people that were involved won't talk about it probably for the rest of their careers. I don't mind because there's so much learning to be done. But my years at 20th, 2012, 13, and 14. So in that time frame, there's some things that you would remember. General Chilton was the STRATCOM commander at the time when we lost some control over about 50 missiles.
Yeah.
And that put a lot of pressure on the commander at that time. Great guy.
Super intelligent guy. Former astronaut. Yeah. Really smart guy.
I got to ride on an airplane back from Omaha with him, and we had the back of the plane to ourselves. So I found out that his wife was a test pilot and a future astronaut, and she liked him, and she invited him to a baseball game, and the guy's throwing a no-hitter in the baseball game, and he leans over and looks at her and says, "He's throwing a no-hitter." And she said, "What's a no-hitter?" So we knew that she didn't know anything about baseball. She just wanted to get him alone on his own. He's a great
General
guy.
Kevin Chilton, great guy.
But I asked him, I said, "How did it feel at your change of command when you passed off the baton?" Because, I was in the middle of that and I felt the weight. Yeah. He said, "Dave," he said, "when I passed that flag," he said, "my back physically popped."
Oh, gee.
And I said, I believe that, sir. I believe that.
Yeah.
Early 2012, we'd had a brush with the National Command Authority up to the president, where some explanations had to happen. We had come off of we weren't too far removed from nukes being flown from Minot to Barksdale. Not my time, but I was around it. So a lot of scrutiny of the enterprise. And then, unfortunately, a great man and a great leader and a prior enlisted guy and a guy that I would go back to war with had a little brush with some time when he was in Russia, and he got fired. think you might remember that in the news.
Yeah.
And then I went through the cheating scandal with the Missileers. And I got to sit with Martha Radich and watch her conduct her 60 Minutes interview with my boss. So 3 generals at that time. And I tell you, Mark, all 3 of those guys I would go to war with. All 3 of those guys understood the enlisted force and what needed to be done. And all 3 of those guys let me be a command chief, even probably to the losing the night's sleep, maybe. So the lessons out of that are, we're not perfect, right? We're definitely not perfect. My message to young, up and coming, especially almost or new senior NCOs, is don't confuse your position with the authorities of your commanders and your officers, because that weight is a different weight, and you'll never feel that until you get out in the world. Like I have one. I led through COVID and did some things here corporately, and you get a different perspective of that. Never lose that weight. And when you're supporting them, you need to make sure that you have their back to the point where they can confide in someone. Because I heard things come out of senior officers' mouths that I know I know my generals told me things that the colonels never knew. They never will know. And if they did, they may even have different opinions today. And those are our secrets. The privilege of serving at the levels that I did, because I'm amazed that I got that far. The privilege of being able to serve at that level is immense. There's an intimacy there. There's almost a priest confessioner relationship where some things shouldn't be shared at great levels of detail. What a huge challenge that was. And I'll tell you, I ran into the Global Strike Commander about 2 years after I retired. I was in Grand Forks, retired in Grand Forks, and he came out as a civilian too, but he was representing a contracting company for Malmstrom. And we ran into each other. He says, "Chief, you look 20 years older." And I said, "You think?" And he goes, "I think those last 3 years were pretty rough on you." And if you've ever been a command chief when your boss loses his job, you mentioned General Mosley.
Yeah.
If you've ever been in that position, it's pretty lonely. And people have to make tough calls. And in the end, it's one person's call. Eisenhower said that the best night's sleep he ever got was when he decided to go on D-Day. Up until that point in time, it was all on him. Once he decided to go, it was all down to the 06 and below level.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Mosley's another one of those guys. If he was leading a 4-ship I was flying in and ran into the ground, I'd be right next to him. I'd be a smoking hole in the ground right next to him. We loved that man.
Yeah.
He was an incredible leader. One real quick story about him, just really quickly. The first night of shock and awe, Dave, 6 F-117s didn't get gas. And I'm the chief of the Air Refueling Control Team. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Just find out for me." I call over to Al Udeed. I get the story. It's really a stupid thing that happened. And he's not going to like it, but he's got to know. And you know what he said to me? He said, "Don't you worry about this at all. This is the fog of war. This is going to happen. It's going to happen numerous times. Those targets aren't going anywhere. We'll remap them and we'll go back in and get them. Don't you and your tanker guys worry about this. You guys are doing great work. Keep moving. Keep going forward." That is the sign of a great leader.
I agree.
And he had it in spades. I wish I could find him. He's back in South Carolina somewhere. I wish I could find him. But you work for leaders like this, as a command master chief. Kevin Chilton, of all people. I mean, astronaut who flew the shuttle and then goes on to be a 4-star general.
Yeah.
Just fantastic people.
And, he's so funny because when you're an astronaut, you're a pretty accomplished guy, right? You're the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, And, the rule of thumb was astronauts didn't go past 06. And the reason is they didn't jump through all the other holes, the hoops, right? They didn't have to have the joint staff. They didn't have to have all of that stuff. They didn't even have to go to Air War College. You should have him on. We should find him and put him on because he's got some stories about how he ended up where he ended up. And you want to talk about a unicorn and the things that he had to learn. He had to learn a lot. He was learning things that captains and majors learn that he just didn't, just wasn't his purview. But he's very humble about it. Yeah, he's a great leader. So that drives me. You talk about great leaders and fun things. And I know you're a tanker guy, so you can talk about this stuff all day. I'm in Balad. I'm filling in for the command chief, and I get an email from Colonel Tom Sharpie. Sharpie's retired now as a 3-star. And he goes, "Hey," he says, "I'm down here in the KOC." He's the Dermob 4. He says, "I'm down here in the KOC." He goes, "I'm going back to Fairchild. I need a new command chief. I'm moving on from my guy. And you're on the list, so I want to interview." So we do the VTC. So I'm in Balad, and he's in he's in Al-Udeid. And we do this interview. And 2 days later, I get an email. Hey, congratulations. I'm going to have you come to Fairchild to be the command chief. But if you know Tom Sharpie, Tom's pretty blunt. He's the youngest of 11 kids raised by a firefighter in Phoenix, Arizona, if that's not enough of a picture. And he went to the Air Force Academy and he played rugby. So there's the guy's going to tell you where he's coming from.
Yeah. Not football, but rugby.
Right, exactly.
No pads.
Right, exactly. So he tells me, he says, back then, the way we selected command chiefs was not right. And we've gotten much better at it. He says, I almost didn't hire you because you were a medic. And I said, really? And he says, yeah. He goes, I have the majority of my stuff is maintenance issues. And he goes, I really wanted to hire a maintainer because I think that it would have advanced what we're trying to do. But he didn't tell me what was going on because we hadn't got back together. So I redeployed from Balad, God bless my wife, into billeting at Grand Forks, into TLF at Grand Forks. The wife's already shipped everything. And off we go to Fairchild. So I don't meet him. First time I actually physically am in a room with him and shake his hand, I stood behind him at church. And so he turns around, shakes my hand. We didn't say anything because it was church. And then the next day I run into him. Well, what I didn't know going to Fairchild was I was walking into total force integration with the 141st Air National Guard. He says to me, hey, we're doing this guard thing, total force integration. They've got planes. They're down on this thing they call the campus. They're over here on the base. We're over here. All the planes are the same. We've got this big giant that you've been to Fairchild. We've got this big giant hangar that used to hold 4 B-52s. We can do maintenance on 97 135s all at once. But what we've got to do is we're going to all get together. We're going to be totally forced integrated, same maintenance, same toolboxes, same everything. Well, how hard can that be, right? You say, hey, you guys get your planes, push them down to this end of the ramp. The TOs are the same. Everything's the same, right? So I take on this. Oh, in the meantime, he does the disappearing commander thing on me. He leaves. He goes to TDY. He goes to Washington, D.C. We're 45 days into our relationship. And he calls me and he says, I got some bad news. And I said, you're leaving. And he goes, yep. He says, they're sending me to GOMO. So I'm going to run GOMO. I said, they're going to make you a general. We got it. It was a big joke. Yeah. They're going to make you a general. And Art Light at the time was the AMC commander. And he's a smart guy.
Yeah.
And he asked Bob Thomas to come from MacDill to Fairchild. So I got a commander that had been a tanker wing commander already at Fairchild. And Bob Thomas, this is the general that did my retirement ceremony at 20th. I had him come and do that. I think some of my best work in the United States Air Force was at Fairchild. And it's partly because of the team and it's partly because of the leaders I was around. So here comes Bob Thomas and we're dealing with the guard. It is truly a maintenance thing. So I get all the guard chiefs together. I get all the active duty chiefs together. I get them in a room. I'm sitting at the front of the table and I think I got that. I've done this 1,000 times. All it is team building, a couple of cups of coffee, everybody to the club. We'll throw back a couple of beers. And tomorrow people will be pushing toolboxes. The meeting, Mark, ends up, and it was almost a fist fight. The two maintenance chiefs are standing up. They look like two roosters getting ready to go at it. I mean, the feathers are up, the neck veins are out, right? The language is reminiscent of an old sailor convention. And I'm sitting there, and people can't see me on the podcast, but I'm doing what I was then. I'm sitting there, and I literally had my hand on top of my head, and I'm looking at this, and bless him, the state command chief, who was Chuck Haley, he's looking at me, and he's just kind of shaking his head, and I'm not getting it, and I'm thinking, okay, like good stubborn chiefs will do sometimes, you reattack, right? You run the same mission plan. And so I said, okay, guys, sit down for a minute. Sit down. I said, how hard is this for us? I said, the toolboxes are all the same color. It's the same stuff. They had a really, really nice fuel cell on their campus, the guard. And I said, I know we're probably going to use your guys' fuel cell, but I said, everything else needs to come down. We got space for them. Naive me. I didn't know that there was unions involved with the guard. I didn't know, the state structures. I was pretty naive. So I think if Sharpie would have hired a maintainer, he would have had the same challenges. It didn't matter. But I was taking this active duty approach with guard guys. And so here comes the lesson. And the lesson comes from a few different directions. One was the vice at the time was two. I went through two vices, and both are great human beings. Blaine Holt, who you know, and Tim Bush. In fact, Blaine and I just talked the other day. We were just back and forth the other day. Great guy. And those guys, how vices work at a wing, right? They got to be the heavy. So they're running the stuff, but they had to do a lot of backdoor, unofficial conversations to make things work like I was. I go from this fight to, okay, I've got to change my tactic. I need to go make some friends. I need to go down to the Perkins in Spokane and eat breakfast with these guys. Because these guys weren't wearing their uniform every day. Chuck Haley happened to be a law enforcement officer in the local area, and he was the state guard chief. So there I got introduced to, okay, no more traditional active duty. Everybody show up at the command section meeting space. It was, we're down at Perkins and he's in his cowboy boots with his badge on. And we're talking about how are we going to get everybody together? So we struggled with it a little bit. I built some great relationships. I have some great friends from that assignment. And in fact, I don't keep a whole bunch of Air Force stuff around the house, but my National Guard Minuteman that they gave me when I left sits around and it says on there, thanks for the good fight, because it kind of was a fight. And I think everybody knows TFI ends up being a reality, and we do it. But we learned a lot in Fairchild. We did a lot of beta testing there. And so Chuck takes me. And, in the book, I talk about you don't know what you don't know, so you better stop wondering and you better go find out.
Great chapter.
Yeah, thanks. And it's easy to look across the room and say, look at Mark. Mark's 50 pounds overweight. He must sit on his couch all day and eat ho-hos, right? And if I'd walk across the room and say, hey, Mark, how you doing? Buddy, I'm concerned about you or whatever. And your fitness looks like it's suffering. And if you gave me a story that, you had some catastrophic health event in your life and that you just can't metabolize food anymore, and this is kind of where you're at and you can't exercise it gives me a different perspective. Right now I know you have a struggle, even though I've branded you as lazy. I remember a guard guy told the local congresswoman, she's still in office, and she was a huge help. We had this round table and she asked one time, and he goes, why should we take our planes that are like finely tuned Lamborghinis and push them down and intermix them with the active duty planes that are old? And Mark, you climbed in a guard airplane.
Oh, absolutely, man. It smells like a new airplane, and it's 60 years old.
It's a whole different world.
It is.
And you have to go learn that. Finally, Chuck, and I'll tell you, retired General Thomas, then Colonel Thomas, we did it, and we made the commitment. So finally, Chuck takes me down. He says, I want you to meet me down at the camp. And so I go down to the guard campus, and it's gorgeous, There's not a tool out of place. There's not a fluff ball on the floor. The planes that are parked in there, you're right, they could be coming off the Boeing assembly line. They're perfect. They won't even fly them. I mean, if the pilot's seat got a little, the seat, there's a wiggle in it, the thing's grounded. They're gonna fix it. So Chuck takes me into the fuel cell. And he's explaining, now, being a medic guy, I need to know. And I did this my whole career. There's another chapter about that. You got to learn, the leadership lesson is you got to learn other people's lives if you're going to lead them. You got to know. You can be a pilot and lead, but you better know what the fuel cell guys do for a living, because it makes you better. Yep. So anyway, he's explaining a little bit of that. And he takes me into the office and he says, do you like this office, Dave? And I said, it's just the maintainer's office. I said, it might be the nicest office on base, Chuck. And he goes, you know why? And I said, why? He goes, because it's custom, Dave. We built it. We bought the wood, we cut the wood, we sanded the wood, we stained the wood, we built the desk. And the light's starting to come on. And he walks me out on the floor. You see those names etched in the cement right there? And I said, yeah. And he goes, what name's second from the bottom? And I said, Airman First Class Chuck Haley. And I looked at him and he said, now tell me, Dave, that it's easy for us to pick up all of our stuff and push it down onto your end of the fly line and leave all this. And I grew like an oak at that minute. And I made a pact with myself at that point in time, and it's paid off even today in life, even with my kids. It has paid off to stop and say, tell me your story. Before we got on here, Mark, what did we talk about? I mean, we reiterated our stories, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important.
Absolutely. And Dave, what an incredible life lesson you just shared with all of us, okay? To all my listeners out there, the crew chiefs on the guard airplanes have been turning wrenches on them for a decade or more. They know every square inch of that KC-135 tail, because they put the new screw in it. They put the new seat cushions in it. They went out there in the middle of the summer, 98 degrees on the ramp, and were painting the desk or putting new plexiglass on the navigator's desk. I mean, all of the different things. That is why when you go on a guard and reserve airplane, it smells like a new tanker and it's 60 frickin' years old, because those guard and reservists have been working on that airplane for a decade or more. They know every square inch of that. And that is why there's such a big difference between the active duty, where you have young kids working on the airplanes. They'll go to one airplane, they go to another base. These guys have worked at that unit for most of their adult lives and have worked on that one airplane most of their adult life. Even though the pilots will fly whatever tail number they're given, but that crew chief and his crew have been working on that airplane 10 years, 15 years. Their names have been on the side of that airplane. The only thing that's changed is their rank.
That's right.
Over the decade.
That's right. Huge learning curve. And so when you get into joint operations, you get into international operations and those type of things, boy, you've really got to slow down and understand your way is a way, but it is not the way. Yeah. If you're going to build coalitions, it's huge.
Another great story. I worked at the Vicenza Chaos during Allied Force, and man, was that an eye opener for me, watching all the NATO partners work together. Mm-hmm. Well, we can't hit these kinds of targets. Well, our government doesn't want us to do this. Yeah. Well, your F-117s are down here doing sneaky things that, we want to know what they're doing. It was crazy. And then we had some of our NATO partners off the end of the runway calling Belgrade, telling them, okay, here comes the F-117s. Okay, here comes another strike package. I think, Dave, one of the things you're getting at too is culture.
Huge.
Culture. Huge. Every unit has its own personality and culture. And trying to get the Washington Guard and the 92nd Wing married up was huge, because now that's the way we do it. Yes. That's the way we do it. Yeah. Okay.
You know what we did? I'm taking quantum leap. All we did was took their ace. They had their wing flash was an ace of spades.
Yeah.
We took that and we married it up with our tail flash, and we built one tail flash, and we took all those airplanes and changed it. And as soon as that started, because that's a culture change, right? We changed the flag, we modified it and built ownership. And that started down the road.
That's also a change in mindset though, too. And people have to understand that. And I think that's one of the things you're talking about too. There's a big mindset change that goes on when you do all this, because the cockfight you're talking about, that started because I didn't know how they did their business. Now you do. And again, that's a huge mindset change too. So anyway, keep going.
Huge. So you were talking about Vicenza, the little leadership. There's stories in there. When I was coming out of, and I write a little bit about this in the book. When I was coming out of Travis, Travis was probably my least favorite assignment of the 15 that I had. Big medical center is just a grind, but I learned a lot. And I got into, I was getting at the top of my game in medicine. I was doing really well. And I finished nursing school, and I was working downtown in the Oakland Bay area in the trauma environment.
Trenches.
Yeah. Learning
in the trenches of Oakland.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Oakland, Richmond, San Pablo, 7th per capita homicide. And I was doing that kind of stuff, but that all benefited people later on in other parts of the world in our combat life. So they decide to stand up obtuse thing known as drones, Predator. And so you're laughing because we're going to have some corollaries with your stand up at the Air Warfare Center, or at least the tanker portion of it. The Air Force went out wide. The ACC chiefs, right? The functional chiefs at ACC went out Air Force wide and said, we've got this opportunity, but we had to apply. So they were hiring advanced medics, independent medics. They were hiring admin people, all that type of stuff. So no matter what the AFSC was, you're going to love this story. We haven't talked about this. This is going to get you laughing. So we all apply. So the ACC chief gets to pick from every medic that applies out of the whole United States Air Force. He gets to pick his top, I think there's 6 of us. He gets to pick his top 6. I mean, one day he called up and said, you've been selected. Your orders were there the next day. And about 60 days later, I was in a car driving to Las Vegas. It's like the right stuff, right? And so we're all headed to Las Vegas. Admin, intel, what am I looking for? Life support, not life support, but runway ops, everybody's going there.
Yeah. Maintainers, everybody.
Indian Springs had 4 civilians out there to put nets up to catch the Thunderbirds when they had a problem when they were training. There was nothing out there, right? Everybody. So hold the maintenance thought though. This gets funny. So we get there, and here are all of our, really mainly the support staff, and our eyes are this wide Our chests are puffed out to here. We got brooms in hands. We're sweeping sand out of buildings. We're putting windows back in ambulances and trucks, and we're pulling stuff out of WRM that the tires are flattened off because they haven't been moved for 3 years. It was just, and we're doing all these struggles. And guess who we got for pilots and maintainers? They closed the last Wild Weasel Squadron closed it at Nellis right when we were doing
561st.
And they said, thanks for your service, guys. Everybody out to Indian Springs and learn how to work on a snowmobile engine in this plane that has no pilot. They took every broken aviator in the United States Air Force that was DNIF without possibility of reinstatement and said, you're going to go to Indian Springs and fly this.
I didn't know that, Dave.
Who's committed and who's mildly involved in making all of this happen?
And who's very pissed off?
Yes. And then they dipped into the leadership pool out in the whole United States Air Force. And we got a right seat F-111 guy to come and make that all work. Oh, by the way, the Army's packaging these things up because they don't like them down in Fort Huachuca in things called coffins. They were actually called coffins.
Yeah.
And they're going to send it
to this day.
So we're all sitting. This goes back to Vincenzo. We'll get there. So, and there's my leadership story in here is about the commander, that Dana Richards was his name. Lieutenant, he retired as a colonel, Dana Richards. So we're all sitting there at Indian. We have no airplanes. We have no TOs. We have no instructions, regulations, anything. So General Fogelman flies in his traditional sweater. He's probably the only 4-star that led our Air Force that wore that sweater. And he's in his traditional sweater, so it must have been wintertime. And he's standing in the most immaculate hangar ever with these maintainers that are like, wait a minute, I was working on wild weasels and now I'm out here in the desert and I don't have an airplane and I don't even know what it looks like. We had 2 maintenance chiefs and they were crusty old guys that had been through the mill and they weren't happy either. General Fogelman says to us, I've been looking for the Maytag repairman of the United States Air Force my whole life. And he said, here you are. He says, you're perfect because nothing's ever broken on you because you don't have any airplanes. And I'm going to go back to DC and I'm going to get you airplanes. And a week later, we got 2 cargo planes that landed, off came the coffins. And so we had to learn from scratch. Our medical portion of that was how do you ground a guy that's in a ground control station that has no altitude? If his ear aches, it doesn't matter. He can go to work, right? If he's got a kink in his neck and he can't see the instruments, you can't let him fly. There's no G forces that go along with it. So we had to redesign all that stuff. We were working 24/7. You're familiar. You're in the middle of this Kosovo thing that's going on. Yeah. There's an appetite that's coming for this. They know what it can do and they want it. And
amazing stuff. Even with the very first airplanes, we're like going, holy crap.
Yeah.
Look at this.
And they knew. And they knew because we're going to go from Fogelman now to John Jumper. There's a thing in there, right?
Culture change there too.
Yep, huge. So there's an appetite for this. So we're hustling. So we're working 24/7 and we got to do night flying and we're crashing them. We had tail numbers were 001, 2, 3, 4. And I remember the first time we had an in-flight emergency because a landing gear wouldn't come down. And we all drove to the edge of the runway to watch it crash because there was no human element. We were like, ooh, that's really bad. How much did that cost? Oh, about $800,000. And then they scoop it all up, sweep up the runway. And, there's not even a press release.
I know.
And
ship it back to General Atomics, see if they can fix it.
So imagine the disconnect between these disgruntled pilots that have to drive an hour out and an hour back. And they're in this thing. They're going to the club. Mark, true story. They're going to the club and the fighter guys are pulling them aside and going, oh, you're our newest Toys R Us pilots. So where does that put you in the big ocean of piloting, And Nellis is the wrong place to be doing that anyway, because all the best of the best are there, right? Everybody's coming in and out of there.
All the weapons school guys are there.
Right.
And their instructors.
So how do you take that as a leader? And I'm talking as the officer leader. We had a great chief there. He was the maintenance chief. He was a great chief. And I was really fortunate. A lot of really good stuff happened to me at this assignment. But how do you take that as a leader? You're a guy that's been told you're topped out. Right seat 111 guys are 05s. You might be a really good 05 and you might get a good last assignment because of that, but you're not going to be an 06. There's no place in the Air Force for you. And so Dana Richards gets this gig and he starts to cobble us together. And I'll tell you, I don't want to take credit for this, but this was a huge changing point. I spent time out on the flight line with the maintainers and they're building TOs on a yellow pad. And they're writing things like put a safety wire at number, at the 5 o'clock position and so on and so forth. And the guy's going, no, that won't work. And he clips the safety wire and he pulls it out and the guy erases it. And he goes, let's do it at the 3 o'clock position. And then he writes in the 3 o'clock position. And when that worked, that was fine. And they would staple that together and hand it to the next shift. And that was the TOs for Predator.
Oh my gosh, Dave, I didn't know that.
Wait till we get to TASAR and start flying with a catch. So I win an award. It was a significant Air Force level award, which required me and my boss to fly to Texas to get to the award. And I had to go with the commander. So the night before this award ceremony, we're all out to dinner. And the commander, I'm a staff sergeant at the time. And the commander looks at me and he goes, and this is a guy whose career should have been over. He's getting this reprieve in this command billet. And he looks at me, it's the most amazing thing. And he's going to retire as a colonel. He's not going to be a general. And he looks at me, it's the most amazing thing, another learning moment, but another impact moment. And I'm a little older now, and I've been around a little bit. And he says, Dave, he goes, you've got the commander's ear. I'm at dinner. There's only 5 of us here. He said, do you have any suggestions for me? And I said, yes, sir. I said, you need to spend more time with the maintainers and you need to spend time on the off hours. And he said, what do you mean? He goes, I'm out on the flight line. I said, sir, you don't get it. I said, you need to buy a full set of BDUs. I said, you need to come to work in BDUs, look like the rest of us, get out on the flight line and stand with those guys there at night and watch what they're doing, because you're not going to be able to lead the rest of this unit where you want it to go until you understand the nuances of that. He threw his chicken. He got mad. He threw his chicken down in his plate, and he looked at me and with ensconced in some explicitives, he said, you mean to tell me that I am not going to be able to lead this unit unless I buy a pair of BDUs and go out on the flight line? I said, you'll never get these guys where, because of the culture, right? They came out of Wild Weasels and they're out in the middle of this thing doing. I said, you'll never get there.
And they're doing something completely different than they were working on F4Gs.
Right.
Completely different.
And give me another high-speed aircraft that I can launch and turn sorties and stuff they understood. Mark, we got back from that trip on a Friday night. Tuesday morning, he called me and he said, I want you to come to the office. So if you know Indian Springs back then, it was small. You could walk from where we walked across. Yeah. And I walked over there and he said, come in here. And he had just gotten to work. This was probably about 2 PM. And he said, I want you to know I just got to work. And I turned around and he had the most atrocious looking set of BDUs on. It had come straight from the seamstress who had sewn on the stuff. And there was strings hanging off of it. If a training instructor had gotten a hold of him, he'd had so many demerits. And so after I got a little bit of a giggle and I cleaned him up with a lighter and a pair of scissors and we talked through that. He goes, I'm going to the flight line tonight. It changed the whole unit, Mark. It changed the whole unit. That equates to we got that plane online, and the appetite because you lived it. We got that plane online and we got the GCSs flown over to TASAR and we got them operating. We had to build a tower to put the antenna on there so that we could do line of sight just to launch the doggone thing out of a cornfield in TASAR. And Mark, I'm not kidding you. The air traffic control on that plane consisted of this. And this is your pilot story, and you were on the receiving end of this, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But this is how we did it. The guys in the GCS would call back to a little desk that was next to the GCS that was connected to the KOC by a microphone that looked like something Elvis would sing on. And the pilot, the pilot that was flying the Predator would say, can you get me clearance to 14,000? And the guy in the box would go, Roger, clearance to 14,000. He would pick up a phone, a direct line to the KOC, and he'd say, Predators requesting clearance to 14,000. And somebody in the KOC would go to air traffic control in Sarajevo and say, Predators requesting, and it would go all the way back. Yeah. Now, how many risk points are in that?
I remember that, Dave. I remember that. That was the first combat use in 1999 over Kosovo of Predator, okay? But it was huge.
I know.
Huge, Dave, because when it came time to try some of these guys for war crimes and crimes against humanity, they would say, well, you guys can't find anything. There's no evidence. And they would show them the Predator video of them burying the bodies outside of the village. They just got finished raping, pillaging, and burning. And they had exact coordinates because that laser would go zop and tell them exactly where it was at. I will tell you that because of Neil Heaton was the first commander real quick. And then Dana Rich, because of those two guys who both came out of, they were done. They were done career-wise. There was no more upward mobility. Those two guys cobbling together. Imagine the leadership challenge there, cobbling together those folks. And as I write in the book, and we talked about this earlier, listen. And he listened. And I'll tell you, that didn't always happen in my career.
You had to let some people stumble into bad situations because they wouldn't.
Yeah, I know that. Sometimes you learn the hard way. Thank heavens Dana Richards listened to you and said, hey, I'm going out on the route. You know what, Dave? I did that when I was at Kadena. One night, several nights, I'd go out with my camera onto the ramp and I'd take pictures, night pictures, but I'd talk to the crew chiefs. Well, what are you doing? Well, what needs to be fixed? What's a typical thing that you guys do here in the middle of the night? Of course, we're launching jets at all hours at Kadena because we're doing RC-135 support. We got, deployments, all these different things. But again, I told you when we were talking before we started recording here, that was one of the greatest learning experiences of my life, of my Air Force career. Being out on the ramp at night was a huge education.
Right.
Not just on the tanker ramp, but on the RC ramp, the MC-130 ramp, the F-15 upper fighter ramp, all of these things that are going on. And they're doing engine runs in the hush house. They're doing all these different things. And seeing all these kids, of course, I was just a captain at the time, and the crew chiefs are all going, how you doing, sir? Good to see you out here. What are you doing? That was huge for me.
So I used a different story in the book. I hope, Mark, that people pick this book up, especially I had Tim Bush. Tim Bush wrote me a note. He just finished the book. Tim's a retired colonel. He's a former wing commander at Grand Forks. He was my vice at Fairchild. We've become good friends. And him and General Thomas are terrible bird hunters, but great leaders. And he just wrote me, ironically, I guess timing is everything. He wrote me this morning and he says, I finished the book. And he said, I did a lot of laughing. And he said, I did a little bit of crying. I'm passing it on to the young Captain Bush, who his son's an academy graduate and a captain now.
Yeah.
That's what the book was written for. I hope that it's not a hard read, that. And I hope that people can get through that and get some nuggets.
The name of the book is Giving Back, Life and Leadership from the Farm to the Combat Zone and Beyond, by Command Chief Master Sergeant Dave Nordel.
Mark, one thing I want to pass along, and my wife's been yapping. My wife even learned things in the book that she didn't know, which is amazing. There's a chapter in that book that was really hard for me to write, and for your audience, some of these guys that you've interviewed and I've listened to, their heads will be nodding when I start here. Others will start to listen intently, and others it might take you back to a time that you might wish you made a different decision. And I have those in this example. I didn't get it right all the time. But when I was in Turkey, when we were talking about doing the nuclear mission over the holidays, I had a young airman that got sick. He had a kidney infection. And that's a big deal. And, when you're doing that advanced medic stuff, when you use certain medicines, certain narcotics, and do certain procedures, you have to call. You got to do a double check. You got to call a doc. And I had a great relationship with these two young docs that were in Izmir. We were really knocking it out of the park. I was doing good work. They were liking it. It was making me better. It was making them better. And the other doc in that clinic was the commander. He's a 06. He happened to be on call. And I called him about this guy. And he said, maybe you should send him down to me, let him sit down here in lodging for, billeting for a couple of days. I'll check on him over the weekend and through the week. And that all went well. He came back. He was feeling better. His symptoms were clearing up and it was good. And Christmas Eve, and I'm in my ugly sweater and I kept my stuff in my room. And him and his supervisor pulled me aside and said, hey, some things happened when we were down there. And they described some interactions with this doc that to me sounded like sexual assault. Now, I'm a staff sergeant out on a mountaintop, but I'm the SG. I'm the guy. And he's my patient, my airman, my everything. And so I had a couple of decisions to make. One was, do I say, okay, let me look into it and work back channel stuff and ask some questions? Or, two was do the formal thing. And three was some mixture of both. My choice, because, I grilled them on a few things and I was pretty sure that where the airman was at was right. And so I went and talked to we had one law enforcement guy on the base and then a bunch of security guys. And I went and talked to him and we secured his records and we sent all that down to Izmir. Well, that kicked off an investigation, Mark. And I'll tell you, it was the loneliest time in my absolute Air Force career at any level of leadership. And at that site, I was the doc. I was their medical advocate. That makes you're the mental health guy, you're the priest, you're the cook, you're just kind of everything. And people stop by just to talk and to decompress. And we're dealing with nuclear weapons and PRP and all the things that go along with that. So I knew all their stories. I knew who used drugs before they came in the Air Force because I had to screen them all. And so there's a high level of trust and integrity and confidence, and you got to maintain that. Long story short is my relationships deteriorated with those two docs. I got schooled up and talked to in ways that made me feel tiny. You're the plankton in the sea of medicine. You don't know what you're messing with. people can lose their licenses and their livelihood and all this type of stuff. And you're causing a lot of problems down here on the base. And, something in me, and it's maybe been there since the farm. It may have been there since milking cows. Something in me said, this is painful and it hurts. And the easy way is to just capitulate and maybe say, I'm not so sure, or let's forget about it. And I didn't. Well, the end of that was I get a call from the investigator that says, well, you opened a can of worms. There's a lot of people down here that had the same experience. Colonel got flown to Germany, went to trial, and he actually did jail time. And the reason I put that in the book, because I wanted to write about something that is at an adverse point in time in a leadership position that puts you on the real minority side of it. Even if it's, and I think one of my one-liners in the book is the right side is not always the easy side. And I held the line on that. To this day, Mark, those relationships never repaired. Maybe because somebody was embarrassed, or maybe because they didn't, they couldn't reattack on it and those type of things. I watched a lot of the people that gave me the nuggets that went into that book make tough decisions. We talked before we came on. We talked about General Burtfield, Academy graduate, F-16 driver, my commander. And when I say my commander, he was flew over 100
American.
Great
American.
Unbelievable human. And he was my guy. And I got to be his command chief for over a month. And we worked some really tough issues together. I know we're limited on time. I could talk to you about some things, but he had to make a call. We had a young man that was killed in combat, and we had to fly close air support, all the other missions, and keep the airfield alive and do all of these things in a combat zone and memorialize this guy, as we did too many times over there. And he was Jewish. And I sat in a senior leader meeting where the chaplain advocated for the deceased airman to have this ceremony after hours. And I watched General Field work through the most difficult decision of whether or not we were going to do this thing when it was scheduled, which was when the sun was up, postpone it to a different day, which wasn't right because none of it was matching up, or to have it at night and blow up the flying schedule and everything else. In the end, the chaplain stood his ground, which I respected, but the general had to make a call. And what you realize at that point in time, the people that are levied with that level of responsibility and have to make those calls are really lonely. And I've been lonely. And so for those of you that are out there that are supporting your commanders, or when you go to the speakeasy and you have a cold one and you're at the gym and you're thinking that you know more than they do, unless you felt the gravity of taking that on and the loneliness that goes along with that, you might need to be a little more supportive. And you maybe need to go have some conversations about what that might feel, because you need to build a level of empathy for your leaders that help you be a good follower, because someday you're going to be in those shoes. And if you don't practice the followership, you'll never make it as a leader, because you'll think you know everything, and your followers will let you fall flat on your face. They'll be more than happy to do that if they don't think.
And clap when you do.
I know that's kind of a heavy story, but it's my story.
But you know what, Dave? Sometimes doing the right thing is going to piss a lot of people off. People are going to say, no, just, maintain the status quo, all that kind of stuff. But in the case of that, Doc, you have to look at what you stopped from happening again. That's one of the things that I see happening with leadership now is they won't make the hard decisions. They won't say, no, this is the right thing to do, because of all the noise that's coming from left field and all the noise that's coming from right field. And, oh my gosh, you're going to piss off all the millennials or whatever. But sometimes you just have to say, no, this is the right thing to do. Yeah, he may outrank me. Okay. He may be the CEO of the company. He may be a senior director, but still you have to make the right decision to say, we got to stop this from happening in its tracks. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people now that won't make that tough decision and say, no, that's not what we're going to do.
Listening to the people that you've had on before, I would love for you to make that a standard question in all of these formats, because those people have led at some incredible levels. And I would like to, I guess if you took this back to the weapons school, because you trained pilots at the weapons school to do all of these equations and not to call all the way back to some place in Indian Springs Creech Air Force Base to get permissions to do stuff. The real-time decisions, they need to be made. You get as much data as you can in the appropriate amount of time and you move out. And
Absolutely.
some of that's a little crazy.
Well, no, but that's combat, Dave.
Right.
That's combat. All
and
right.
That's what we train for, right?
That's exactly
what we train and that's what we execute.
That's exactly what we train for. Okay. And we educate. That's the one thing about our military and particularly our Air Force that sets us above everybody else. We train differently. I know numerous guys and gals have told me, oh, combat was easier than weapons school. A lot easier.
Should be.
And you're exactly right. It should be. And I think that training and that level of understanding of why we do something the way we do it is so important, not only in the military, but also in the corporate world. Why are we doing it this way? We don't ask enough questions. And you mentioned that a little while ago about listening. My dad's famous quote, son, the Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Now, listen, son, because a lot of times you will hear important information that other people won't hear that will help you make some of these decisions, particularly in leadership positions. Okay.
And it's really hard. And here's something that my wife would scold me. So I was blessed with her partnership as I started to work through command billets. Sometimes when you get up there in the rarefied air and it gets thin, you can start to not look like yourself. And you got to be really careful with that. I'll give you 2 examples really quick where I had to reground. Part of it was because of her, a quick whisper in my ear, and part of it was because of me, because I grew up on a farm and I know the smell of the earth and the loneliness of, the disaster on the farm belongs to you and you got to fix it kind of thing. When we were at 20th, the boss and I we had some questions and he was instituting some new stuff and we went out in the field. I told him, we got to go to the field. We got to go sleep at the alert facility. We got to sleep with the missileers. We're going to throw on our sweats and we're going to watch Monday Night Football with the guys. And this is in the book. General Jack Weinstein, he retired as a 3-star. He's teaching college in Massachusetts now. And him and I got in our fuzzy bunny slippers and kind of built a relationship with some really young people. They're at the MAF, we're eating breakfast. And guys are coming in and we asked these 2 cops how the night went. It was cold. It was really cold. And asked them how the night went. And they were a little bit hesitant, you're talking to the command chief and the general. And finally, one of them says, we spent all night building a moat. And the general says, a moat? What are you talking about? And he says, the snow's melting at this one particular launch facility and it's getting into the missile and it's causing problems. And so the guys called us and said, find sticks and stones and rocks and start building a diversionary dam, build a moat, divert the water. So these poor guys that were out there doing security because the electronics didn't work, spent all night rummaging through, trying to find rocks big enough to build the moat. This is ground level stuff. This is being down where I belong. This is regrounding, right? On the days when the boss says, hey, we've got to go to DC and the plane shows up and it's just you, the lieutenants schlep your bags onto the plane and you fly to point B and they, the people at reception at Andrews pull you off of the plane. You start to feel pretty doggone special. And that's not what it's about. And you got to put yourself back in it. So here we are. It's cold. We're out there. The guys have built a moat. We're rooting for them to get some breakfast and we don't believe them completely, but heck, they probably had something going on. But the general says to the captain, to the exec, he says, where's that LF? And the captain says, it's over here. He knew he was a missileer. He said, we're not going back to the base. I want to go to the LF. Mark, we drove out to the LF and guess what was there? A moat. Now you know what happens when the 2-star sees a moat, you know how that whole ball rolls.
Yep.
Right. And it rolls all the way down to some poor staff or tech sergeant that was in charge of that shift and that kind of thing. And as I write in the book, those are all fine Americans. That was not somebody doing something malicious or otherwise. It was just, they had this hurry up culture. There wasn't enough empathy and feeling for what they were doing. And there was some expediency there and we needed to slow down to go faster. That's in the book too. Mm-hmm. We need to slow down and we corrected that. We didn't correct it in some awful grotesque manner where people's careers all went. We had discussions like you talked about earlier with General Mosley. We had discussions and we corrected that and we corrected the culture. When we talk leadership, especially from a command chief position, be careful. When people talk to you about derailment, when people talk to you about losing touch, you can get into rarefied air. Every time I would go to DC to the Pentagon and we would sit in a room and talk, it would frustrate me. And I'd always end up in a conversation with a 3-star that was on the staff, the A something, usually the A1. I'd end up in a conversation and he'd go, "That's not true." And I'd say, "Sir, you haven't been to the field. I just left there. It's true." And I would get something like, "Well, I'm going to go find out." And I would never hear back from him. If I was wrong, I would have heard back. And I'd never hear back from him, and that A1, to his credit, actually flew out a couple of months after we had that conversation. As you work your way through the ranks, remember that 80% of the time you got pushed up and 20% of the time you got pulled up, and you've got to go back to where you came from so that you understand or re-ground yourself so that you can properly lead. Because you can get far enough away where you start making some crazy decisions. We call those, the enlisted force calls those gobies, right? General Officer Bright Ideas.
I have never heard that.
When it floats all the way to the bottom and it's really stupid, it's a goby, because it probably was made in some anoxic point of rarefied air by somebody that's been removed from the process for so long that they didn't get it.
And has been so far removed from it, doesn't understand how it works.
Yeah.
Dave, that's freaking church, man. You know that? And you and I have dealt with so many leaders that have, that are gobies.
And I don't hold it against them, Mark, because sometimes even in the enlisted force, it's just as bad. It is set up so I go from being a group superintendent, doing everything. I'm running my calendar. I'm doing all kinds of stuff. I go to Balad. I come back and they say, there's the first 2 people I get introduced to, the wing commander and my executive assistant. I wish I had an executive assistant on the dairy farm. My life would have been a lot easier. That starts to get way too comfortable, Mark. I'm telling you. And I went through, I think, 13 or 14 executive assistants, and I always tried to stay on par with them. I used them as my grounding points, but they were lifesavers. I mean, it did make your life a lot easier. But boy, you can get used to that stuff. And you start getting carted around, and I'm not going to use his name, but I actually had breakfast with a former chief of staff of the Air Force. I was shoulder to shoulder sitting next to him. His wife was sitting across from me. Yeah. He was on the base that I was on, and he was there to do a talk, and he was doing a little mentoring with the boss. And he had just recently, he was the first one out. So he just left. And I said, "Sir," I said, "how's retirement?" And he goes, "Dave, my life," and his wife almost beat him to the punch. He said, "My life is absolutely miserable." He goes, "I don't know how to do anything." He goes, "I've had to relearn to wash clothes. I've had to relearn to mow my lawn." He goes, "I don't even know how to shop." He goes, "Our schedule is screwed up." He goes, "I have no organizational skills." He goes, "I can't do anything." He goes, "I'm an invalid in society because from the time that I was basically a 2-star general until being chief of staff of the Air Force, I didn't realize how much stuff was being done for me."
Huge entourage was following these people around.
Yeah.
So
you got to keep it real.
Yeah. You've got a quote in your book, man, I loved. It was, "Manure is the smell of money." I want you to expound on that a little bit, okay? Because there's some great lessons with that. Manure is the smell of money. And the manure, some call it gross, and some call it the smell of money. Right. There are so many life lessons in that line, Dave. I highlighted it, man. I went, oh, there is so many things to talk about here. But I want you to tell our listeners what that smell really means, right, and why.
So there's 3 components to it. There's my component growing up on the farm. There is that is actually a mantra at Cannon Air Force. At Cannon Air Force Base, they have a thing downtown, the downtown community called the Nifty 50, and it's all the heavy hitters in the community. Most of them are all cattle growers. When the wind blows the right direction, it takes all of the smell of all of their money and it puts it right on the base. And that is from a feedlot. And so most people get to Cannon and they'll complain to the downtown people, "Oh, the wind was blowing from the northeast and the whole base smelled like a feedlot." And the Nifty 50 will say, "And that's the smell of money." It's the same thing we tell people when we say that's the sound of freedom when the jets are ripping off of the ramp and they're going over the edge of town. Yeah. It's the same thing. So that's the Air Force component. The growing up component of that is, I had city cousins. We all had city cousins, right? Everybody grew up on a farm. I had city cousins that would look at stuff. It was almost an insult. They would look at stuff on the farm and they'd say, "That's gross," or "That's icky," or "That's dirty," or "That's broken," and they would go through that. And you would look at that, and that stuff was your pride and joy. It was your cattle. It was your fences, and it was the manure. It was the smell of the manure that every day was produced by the things that keep this country running. Yeah. The basics of stuff. children's brains develop best on milk.
Yeah.
So in essence,
imagine that.
You really want to tie the future of our nation back to a dairy farm. That's it. I mean, our people need to drink milk to have proper brain development to make a difference in the world. There's tying the whole mission together. So you have to be really careful societally. You have to be really careful about your smell, and what that puts into your mind is sometimes other people's garden, and you can't trample on it. So sometimes people leave a trail and you think it's poop, and actually it's the yellow brick road, and it's taking you to Oz and it's getting you home. Not unlike some of the stories. I love the tanker stories where somebody's bingo fuel and there's cloud cover and you find a hole and you punch through it, because we have all in life, Mark, seen the tanker when we were at our lowest point. Who's the tanker? You're not going to talk bad about a tanker pilot. And oh, by the way, when they do pull up behind there, the boom's flying the plane, right? So there's so much. So yeah, the trails of manure and the smells of manure, be careful. Be careful how you track that. I don't know where personally you took that. And if you expound on it, you'll make me a better person. What you took from that. Yeah, you just got to be careful, because smells and sounds and what you see is not always what it is.
You said something really important there. We have to go through the really crappy things in life sometimes to learn the most important lessons. Sometimes those hellish experiences that you go through are your greatest growing experiences. That manure is the smell of money. And that was a very important point that you just made, is sometimes you have to deal with the crap.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to go through these crappy situations, because those situations make you a much, much better leader and a much, much better person. Much better.
Mark, you've been kind enough to share Jeffrey's Hefe's story.
Hefe, yeah.
Yeah, you've been kind enough to share his story with me. And I reflected on that with some of the stuff. I'm writing a second book, and I may not do your story exactly, but there's stories that are similar, not completely similar. But when you tie it back to leadership and the challenges as a leader, you had a leader at that point in time that just popped into your life out of nowhere. You had a relationship, but you didn't know that they were a leader.
Yeah.
And they did certain things that were inherent to them because they had the capacity to do it, and they had the heart to do it, and they had the empathy to do it, and they wanted to feel it. And I know that person was Rush Limbaugh. And the stuff that you shared about what he did for you, just out of the goodness of his heart, with absolutely, actually, he felt like he was repaying you for your years of service. And that story is an incredible story. It made an impact on me, because I really had to reflect back on times when I had people under my leadership tent that had similar issues. I had a first sergeant that had a son that was going to die. He was at Mountain Home. He was going to die, and there was no medical care for him. There was one doctor in the United States of America that specialized medical defect, and he was in Spokane. And he called me and he said, "I've got to get to Spokane." And his command chief at Mountain Home and I started to work his humanitarian. Mark, when I left, when they did my going away at Fairchild, when I left, he drug that kid up to my ankles, and he said, "If it wasn't for you, he would be dead." It took a lot to move that piece on that checkerboard, but look what it did. That is not me patting myself on the back. The growing that I did. So when you started to talk about that, and the people that came into your life and enriched your life and showed levels of leadership that are unbelievable, you never know where it's going to come from. Mm-hmm. And you hope that you've surrounded yourself with people that can contribute that way. So I'm totally with you. And I'm here with you every day. I say a little prayer for you every day, brother, because, you're walking the walk. I almost lost the son myself, and I've been there. So these leadership journeys, and you know what, Mark? There's a little chapter in there about it. Even people cry on the farm. Yep. And the tears are healthy. And I think you and I used that love word through almost this whole podcast. And I mentioned some people that are leaders that I said, are fine human beings, and I love them, and I would work for and with them at any point in time. We're blessed to have all of them. The book is full of a lot of gifts from a lot of people. Those are the books about my trials and tribulations. There's not a lot of home runs in there. It's just about rough spots.
It's amazing how many people you and I know, though. And you and I haven't known each other but a couple months.
Right.
But yet in our backgrounds, Burt Field, he was the weapons school commandant when we were standing up. And he was the guy who actually let us get our foot in the door, to go to the core classes, to be part of the big exercise at the end. You know, we let our graduates manage all the tanker problems for him. Bob Thomas and I went through pilot training together. He's in my pilot training class. I'm sure if we sat down, there's even more people.
Yeah.
But it's surprising how all of these people that you and I know in these leadership positions were there for a reason, did incredible things, like standing up the UAV world. Holy smokes. That changed the face of how we do warfare on so many levels.
Yeah.
So many levels. And that was the very first thing. That was the very first use of unmanned air vehicles in combat in Kosovo, flying out of Tezar. Okay.
Yeah.
Tezar, I think, is in Hungary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tezar, Hungary. And imagine all these guys showing up with this brand new capability going, oh, well, what do we do with it now? And they're still learning. They're still writing their books and doing all these things that they have to do in order to make that a viable weapon system. And now they even have their own weapon school, the UAV weapons school.
Right. Yes.
You know,
it was like being Gus Grissom and Neil Armstrong and the right stuff. It was crazy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was absolutely.
And before we forget him, because it won't be just due. The only reason that you and I are together is because a guy in a silly little baseball cap that said United States Air Force on it was cruising through a coffee shop here in Billings, Montana. And I said, oh, an Air Force guy. And there you go. It's Satchmo, it's Jack Klein. And Jack and I have had a couple cups of coffee together, and he put me together with an EOD guy that's young from the community. And we've sat, and he does mentoring, and he's just a great guy. When the book came out, I sent him the book, and he said, I think that you and Sluggo need to talk. So, and I'm better for it.
I still have that text in my phone. I kept it. For all of you out there listening, Jack Klein was a member of that same Washington Guard unit, who was the first Guard guy to go through our school and came back as an instructor and did fabulous things throughout his entire career before he left the military. I can't say enough good things about my good buddy.
Well, now you can't get your dog washed in Billings, Montana, unless you're at one of Jack's dog washes. He's got the market on the dog washes. It's pretty cool.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Outstanding.
Oh, yeah. He's there's your tidbit for the audience. If you know Jack, call him up, asking how the dog washes are going.
Yeah, that's funny. Hey, Dave, there's a picture in your book that kind of struck me, because as I'm looking at it, I'm like going, I think that's the time that there was some really funny things going on in Mogadishu. You have a picture of yourself in Somalia, 1993 Somalia, leaving on a convoy. Wasn't that like really close to when Black Hawk Down happened?
I actually had some comments, Mark. People asked, why didn't I write about Somalia? But I had a picture in there. Tough story to tell. It's not gory because my time frame was odd. You got to remember 1993 when Air Force people went and did something like that, it was considered TDY. We weren't deployed, right? It was TDY.
Yeah.
I was an independent duty medic. I was specialized. There was only a handful of us in the Air Force. There needed to be one on the airfield. A guy named Bill Thomaston happened to be my predecessor there on the airfield. He went through October 3rd. He went through Black Hawk Down. And 3 days later, here comes Dave, and I get dropped in the middle of this.
3 days later?
3 days after Black Hawk Down. So Mike Durrant's still hostage. There's a lot going on with planning. We're still looking for Muhammad Farad Aidid. When I'm landing, they're still putting pictures of our Ranger being drugged through the streets. Here I am. I'm in the middle of this. I had come out of Travis. I had been at Travis. My son was born on the 2nd of July. I had been at Travis for 45 days, and they spun me up and sent me straight back to Somalia. And I fell in on this. And I'll tell you, Mark, scary time. I've been more scared for my physical life in other places, the jungles of South America or in Iraq.
Yeah.
As far as being uncomfortable. You got to remember, when we deployed back then in the Air Force time, we took sweatpants and cool looking shirts. And this was a whole different time. There was alcohol on the base. It was a UN mission. The Germans had one C-130 dedicated for beer. I mean, everything, it was a whole different world. And I haven't written about it yet, and I probably need to, because there were so many things pushing and pulling. The leadership thing out of this, the training and the paying attention and the doing the right things and sweating in peacetime and not bleeding in wartime, it all crescendoed right there. And it really spun me into a mindset of things that I will never do again. Things that can never happen again collectively in our Air Force. We learned a lot of lessons, but Mark started to build. In fact, my wife saved every letter that I wrote from there, and it's packaged up and they're rubber banded, and my boys can read it after I die. But I wrote her a long letter because we were planning to put together one specialized medical team with one insertion back into the stadium in Mogadishu.
Oh my gosh.
To stage to go get Mike Durrant. We didn't do joint ops back then. We were still trying to learn lessons from the Iran hostage crisis and interoperability and those stuff. And it was a two-man Navy team, a two-man Army team. Doc Pasquarel was the Army flight surgeon on the Blackhawk side who was there. He was the guy. And he had actually sent one of his medics up to fly on the 3rd of October because he had been begging him to get in to kind of get in the stuff, and he lost him. Yeah, we were all going to go do this. And the planning that went into that and the stuff, the things that started to show up that weren't there, the armor that showed up and some of the special ops equipment that showed up, all of that was going on. Really intense for wet behind the ears flight surgeon that was worried more about missileers and tanker guys at Grand Forks and me. And I had some experience. I had some field experience. That was a whole kettle of fish. And you want to talk about being a good follower and keeping your ears open and listening to everything that everybody had told you. I was trained. Mark, if you got shot in the chest, I could take care of it. If you needed to be intubated, you need a tube in your throat, I could do that. But you had to get there. You had to have the right battle rattle on. You had to have the right weapon. You had to have the right tactics. We were way behind on some of that stuff. It was a scary time. The politics were scary. The approach of the United Nations to that mission was scary. We were coming out of I laugh because I have to be the only medic that did 30 years in the Air Force, and I do not have a humanitarian service medal because every time I showed up to help somebody started shooting and it turned into a different operation. It was odd. I don't talk about this very often. In fact, my boys keep pressing me on it. There's some things that happened there that I'm not proud of collectively, not just Dave stuff that I'm not proud of. There's some things that happened to some people there that I think to this day have still fallen through the crack, because how many people talk about Somali war veterans? We've got Wilkinson, who was a pararescue guy that was given the Air Force Cross out of that mission, probably deserved the Medal of Honor, but we just didn't do that.
You never hear that, Dave. You never hear about Somali vets.
No, you don't. They don't even get a mention in history. The Grenada guys get a bigger mention in history. The Panama guys get a bigger mention in history than the Somalia guys. Somalia is a movie on television that, quite frankly, because of the way that they portrayed it, I think they did a good job. If you talk to the guys that were there, they did a good job and they had some input into that. But I don't think people can fully absorb what was going on there. You want to talk about asymmetrical environment? Oh,
jeez.
And it was asymmetrical on a lot of levels. And so there was a lot of learning to be done in there. That picture, the cover picture, is Somalia. We were out that day. We were out doing an EOD shot. We had collected up, I don't know how many tons of munitions. I know that ton was 18,000 pounds. It looked like a small atomic weapon went off when we did it. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and we got tangled up into some things that were kind of scary. We got dismounted there and intermixed with some of the Somali people, and just so much going on. You learn man's inhumanity to man, and there's just so much going on. And yeah, they were negotiating with a deed while I was still there. I'll never forget the day. This will make you laugh. The day they came to get Durrant, we got him out. He went up to the field hospital, which was up by the embassy on the hill. And they always came down to us, and then we put him on the medevacs. We were still flying C-141s back then. Yeah. And they brought a Salamander down to get him. And I remember that my jaw dropped. Christian Amanpour from CNN was standing from me to my laptop away, asking for a box of water. That came in boxes. Kilimanjaro water was a box of water. It looked like a milk carton. And she was asking for a box of water. And I remember the back of that 141 opening up. This is a sad Air Force story. And out came the air crew to pick up Mike Durrant. And it was all master sergeants and lieutenant colonels. It was people I hadn't seen the whole time I had been there. All the airmen and the captains. So there was so many learning lessons. I I was scared for a couple of reasons, Mark. One, you're always scared for your safety in an obtuse environment like that you don't understand. I was also scared because I don't think medically I was fully trained. Militarily, where I was asked to go and what I was asked to integrate with, I was not trained at that level. We've changed all this and we've fixed it. I wasn't trained, and I had a confidence problem. I had a confidence problem because the things I was seeing, smelling, hearing, and doing, I had not been inculcated into in a controlled environment where somebody could. It's like Army guys that are low crawling at 2:00 in the morning underneath barbed wire and they're shooting live rounds over their head. There's a benefit to that.
Yeah.
I just didn't have that. Neither did my flight surgeon. And I would argue neither did the Navy guys, because we had not been exposed to it at that point in time. That's a point in time in history that I hope that you can find somebody to talk to you on your podcast that is even more intimate with it than me, because we just haven't. I know that there's a movie out there, and I know, and those guys are such high integrity guys, and they are just they're the epitome of what you think they are, the Rangers, and how they work within themselves. It was an honor to even have a sniff of the SEAL team that was in country, and to be able to be brought in to their inner circle for the small amount of time that was there. Funny story. We had a water bladder that fed our showers, and on there was a thermostat. And when I got there, all the showers were cold, and it wasn't a big deal because you're living on the equator, so cold showers okay. But everybody was kind of crying about it. I'm the medic, quality of life, blah, blah, blah. Air Force people, right? You got to have a hot shower.
There's no golf course.
Right, exactly. Well, So I went on kind of a mission. I called back, you started at Cairo West. I called back to Cairo West. I said, we need this thermostat. Here's the part number. I'm working with my airfield guys. Just send the thing down here. How hard can this be? I'm a week into this negotiating thing to get the hot water. And this guy rolls through the tent, black shorts, brown t-shirt, little gnarled. He's not brand new to the military. He's seasoned looking individual. And I'm sitting down to the old KY phones, the old green field.
Yeah.
Sitting down,
oh yeah.
Sitting down next to the old KY phone, and I'm actually getting ready to talk to 3 operators to get to Travis to get to the floor that my wife was working on, so I can talk to her for all of 5 minutes. So those were the days where you didn't cell phone and you weren't mailing every day. You were writing handwritten letters. And this guy says to me, "How are you doing?" Well, in great Staff Sergeant Dave Nordel fashion, I turn around and I let him have it. I said, "This place is blah, blah, blah," right? And he goes, "What's going on?" I said, "This thing has been broken for this long. We can do reach back logistics on anything else in the world, but we can't get this one thing. And all we need is this, and we can have this," which was a hot shower. And the guy kind of nods his head and not overreact. He doesn't really do much. He just kind of takes in my little staff sergeant. I'm the medic and I'm trying to take care of the world, take on things. And he leaves. And I look around the tent, and there's some of the nurses, some of the medevac people. I've worked with them, but I didn't work with them on different missions. Medevac people are sitting around the tent, and their jaws are at their ankles. And I looked at them and I said, "What?" And they go, "Dude, that was General Garrison. You just went off on General Garrison." And I said, "Well," I said, me and my pastor, I said, "Was it a lie?" They said, "No, but you just freaking went off on the 2-star." And this is 3 days after Black Hawk Down, 4 days after Black Hawk Down. And I rip him. Do you know what, Mark? The part showed up.
Because he's a leader.
Absolutely. All of that was going on. He got the Air Force, their hot showers.
I've met Garrison.
Unbelievable human. And the reason I talk about Somalia and not getting its just due, I think we owe General Garrison a promotion and an apology.
I agree. You know why I know him? He was one of the mentor generals that would come to the Joint Forces Staff College.
You know him better than I do.
He came and told that story, the whole story about Black Hawk Down. Here I am at a joint school, Dave, and he's going, "We've never done anything joint. And the only thing that we've done joint was in Iran and went very, very badly."
So he said the same thing I just did.
Yeah, he did. That's what's amazed me about what you just said is we didn't practice joint. We didn't train joint. We didn't talk joint. We looked at each other around the table and like, "Okay, well, what do you guys do? Okay, well, what do you guys do? Okay, what do you guys do?" Literally, they're doing on-the-job joint training while they're trying to do this UN mission, which turns into this, now we're going to go find this bad guy, Adid. The first time we ever start trying to pick a needle out of a haystack, an actual human being, we're going to find him in this backward third world country. and he gets the best of us because they're better at intelligence than we are.
Right. Do you know what it made me laugh? And you've been in the school environment, so I know you know this probably better than me. The glows and the ALO.
Yeah.
They would always walk in the room, right? And they were talking from a whole different language and a whole different perspective. Mark, in 1993, the glow had to be in the AWACS and the ALO had to be embedded on the ground in harm's way to make that work, because they didn't have classroom learning to have the common language where they could be someplace other than right in the middle of the fight to be of any value. That was Somalia.
Think about what came out of that. The Army helicopter guys finally create the 160th SOAR, specialized helicopter guys for just doing those kinds of missions.
Yeah.
Is one of the lessons learned that came out of there, where people, Garrison, Army guy, saying, we got to do this better. It was fascinating listening to him talk about all of the things that went wrong. And he took ownership of it. He says, I didn't know enough, but that's because the system didn't teach me how to do it.
You know, the Army for years, because of the Cold War, they were like this. I'm artillery, I do this. I'm armor, I do this. And I'm infantry, and there was no integration. He didn't know that there was armor there, obviously, and he probably told the story about dealing with the Pakistani tank commander and that.
He did talk about that.
That is intense.
Yeah.
Because of the fight that they were in, and because of the symmetry of the fight, he should have never went to the fight without the extra adjuncts, which would have been the armor. Yeah. And if he couldn't have gotten the armor in country through the United Nations, then he should have waited, because it didn't take that long back then to move armor. I mean, the C5s were in there every day. We could have had enough armor for him to do that in a couple of days. But that wasn't in his job jar. His job jar was fight with what you got. Yeah, none of us were, Mark. Yeah. None of us.
Go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And Les Aspen, if I remember right, turned M1 tanks down because he didn't want to escalate.
You know, the only reason I missed October 3rd, I got there late. They bumped me off of Chalk in Dover for those tanks.
Oh, did they really?
Yep. My C5, in fact, I was supposed to have a C5 all the way. And that's a funny story. I took a 141 out of Dover, which was the next thing smoking that was going to Cairo West. And I was in Somalia for like 2 days. And that 141 that I flew in on came down, had a number 4 fire, and the aircrew had to stay there. The aircrew had to stay there 3 days. They could not get a waiver to do a 3-engine takeoff. They slept with their helmet flak vest on. We had to give them armor, and they slept with their helmet flak vest on.
Oh, geez.
I find it amusing, because those were guys that they didn't know. C-141 guys had never been in a place that when the sun went down, you were probably going to get mortar attacked.
Yeah.
They'd never.
Yeah. Or rocket propelled grenades
and the plane was a target. The ramp had to be empty at sundown.
I have a good friend of mine that flew C5s in and out of Mogadishu, carrying those tanks and a lot of other things that were coming in and out of there.
That was our alarm clock.
And you know what? He said it was like Wild West.
The stories are all the same, Mark. I mean, I think Wild West is an understatement. Our level of unit discipline. What we did was, instead of taking the training environment and taking it to combat, we took the officer and NCO club and took it to combat. Oh, and even at the end of what would be a duty. Oh yeah. I mean, even at the end of what would be a duty day, I mean, the fridge came open, the German Heineken came out, and you took your uniform off and you put on your bathing suit.
Yeah. And went down to the beach. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
With bad guys watching every stinking move.
And we emboldened them because they saw our lack of discipline. They saw our 0730 to 0430 reveille retreat mentality in an environment where they made it asymmetrical. They made it 24 hours. And the things that we saw were the first time ever. Nobody got to go out into the deserts of Utah and go around a simulated town and be told, don't touch that, because that's what an IED looks like. Here's a tripwire. Nobody did that. They dropped us off, and half of the stuff that we were carrying on our back was tennis shoes and sweatpants.
Great stuff, man. Great stuff.
Actually, you've helped me out. Actually, you helped me heal a little bit here, Mark, because there are, from General Garrison to your friends to the C5 pilot, that is why we don't talk about that operation and that moment in time, because when you really dissect it, we weren't as good as we thought. Mm-mm. We weren't as strong as we thought. Mm-mm. And we sent a message. Maybe we inherited some of how emboldened asymmetrical armies, the
Al-Qaeda, everybody.
we emboldened them to take us on because they learned some lessons from that.
It was Al Qaeda guys that shot down the helicopters, the helos.
Yes.
They're the guys that were waiting on top of the roofs for these things to happen and knew what we were going to do better than we knew what we were going to do. And Garrison talked about that.
Yeah.
He says they were way inside our heads.
Great leader. Great man.
All right, brother. We've been going almost 2 hours. Hey.
I know. Can you believe it?
Oh, I'm sure if I kept going through the book, I'd find even more things, But I want all of you to go out and buy Dave's book, Giving Back, Life and Leadership from the Farm to the Combat Zone and Beyond. So many great lessons learned in here. A really easy read. This is one of those books that you will not put down if you pick it up, and you can get through it in a weekend. Giving Back, Life and Leadership from the Farm to the Combat Zone and Beyond, with Command Chief Master Sergeant Dave Nordel. Thanks for being on today, brother.
Thank you, brother. God be blessed.
Chief Nordel said something very interesting during our conversation. We don't pay respect to the vets of Somalia in the Battle of Mogadishu. The operation was called Operation Gothic Serpent. And I don't know if my listeners know this, but 2 Delta Force snipers, Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, were awarded Congressional Medals of Honor for their firefight with the Somali militia trying to protect helicopters that had been shot down in Mogadishu. And Osama bin Laden took notice of our weakness here in 1993. We already knew his name and what he was trying to do. He was living in the Sudan. Folks, this is a great episode with Chief Dave Nordel. Thanks for listening. Please go to my website, markasera.com, for this and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Also, go visit wallpilot.com and look through the ready-to-print images of all these different airplanes. That's how we're financed. Take some time to go look through these and order some of these great images, 4, 6, and 8 feet, that are printed on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to the walls of your home, office, or hangar. And we've got World War II all the way up to 5th generation fighter. I really thank all of you for spending time to listen to these. Please comment on them on my website. And we will talk to you next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.